Maria wiped down the marble countertop for the third time that morning. It already sparkled, but Mrs. Harrington had made it clear that everything needed to be perfect. Not just clean, but absolutely flawless. The annual charity gala was tomorrow night, and the entire penthouse had to look like something out of a magazine. "Mom, I finished my math homework." A soft voice called from the small room off the kitchen. That was Elena, sitting cross-legged on the narrow bed with her textbook spread around her. She was 12 years old with dark eyes that seemed to notice everything, even when she tried to make herself invisible. Maria looked at her daughter and felt that familiar ache in her chest. The one that came every time she saw Elena doing homework in a maid's quarters instead of a proper bedroom. The one that reminded her of all the things she couldn't give her child. But Elena never complained. "Not once in all these years. Good job, sweetheart. Just stay quiet for a bit longer, okay? Mrs. Harrington is in one of her moods today." Elena nodded and pulled out her library book. She was used to this routine. After school, she'd take the subway to this massive penthouse on the Upper East Side, where her mother worked from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. Sometimes later, the Harringtons lived in a different world up here on the 42nd floor. A world with crystal chandeliers, original paintings on the walls, and a piano that probably cost more than everything Maria and Elena owned combined. That piano. Elena thought about it constantly. She could hear it now echoing through the hallway. Someone was practicing, though practicing might be too generous a word for what was happening. The notes came out choppy and frustrated, stopping and starting over and over again. Even from this distance, Elena could tell the player was struggling with the tempo, missing the emotion that made the piece come alive. "That's Vivian," her mother said, noticing Elena's tilted head. "She's been working on that same song for 3 months now. Some fancy competition piece, Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu." Elena knew it by heart. She'd watched dozens of performances online, studied the sheet music on free PDF sites, and practiced the fingering on the broken keyboard they'd found at a thrift store last year. The keys stuck, and some didn't make any sound at all, but it was enough. Enough to let her fingers learn the patterns, to understand how the music should flow. "Can I go to the bathroom?" Elena asked. Her mother nodded, already moving toward the dining room with her cleaning supplies. Elena slipped out of their small room and walked down the long hallway. The walls were covered with family photos, the Harringtons smiling in front of European landmarks and fancy restaurants. Vivian in her private school uniform. Her older brother Chase with his lacrosse team. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington at charity events, holding champagne glasses and looking important. There were no photos of the people who cleaned these halls, of course. People like her mother didn't exist in the Harrington family story. The music room door was half open. Elena paused just outside, where she couldn't be seen but could hear everything perfectly. Vivian slammed her hands on the keys in frustration. "This is impossible. I can't do it." "You're not concentrating," came another voice. Mr. Peterson, the expensive piano teacher who came 3 times a week. "The transition here requires more delicate touch. You're forcing it. I've been practicing for hours every day. My fingers hurt. My back hurts. I'm sick of this stupid piece." "Vivian, you're the one who chose to perform this at the gala. You told everyone you'd play it. Your mother has invited half of New York's classical music community. Well, maybe I'll just cancel. Tell them I'm sick or something." Elena heard footsteps and quickly moved away from the door, pretending to study a painting on the wall. Mr. Peterson emerged, shaking his head, and walked past without even glancing at her. That was normal. Most people in this building looked right through her, as if she was part of the furniture. She waited a moment, then peeked into the music room. It was empty now. The grand piano sat there like a sleeping giant, all black and glossy, with the sheet music still open on the stand. Elena knew she shouldn't. She knew the rules. But her feet carried her forward anyway, drawn by something stronger than fear. The bench was real leather, soft under her fingers as she touched it. She didn't sit down, that would be too bold. But she looked at the keys, white and black, perfectly clean and perfectly tuned. So different from her broken keyboard at home, where the C-sharp didn't work at all and the D key sounded like a dying cat. Her fingers hovered above the keys, not quite touching, moving through the patterns she'd memorized, the opening cascade, then the melody, then that tricky middle section where the left hand had to maintain a steady rhythm while the right hand danced above it. She could see it all in her mind, could hear exactly how it should sound. "What are you doing?" Elena jumped back, her heart racing. Chase stood in the doorway with two of his friends, all of them in expensive designer clothes with that casual confidence that came from never worrying about money. I'm sorry, I was looking for the bathroom. The bathroom? One of his friends smirked. Sure, looks like you were about to mess with Vivian's piano. No, I wasn't, I swear. I was just what? Chase walked closer. He wasn't mean exactly, not like some rich kid she'd encountered. But he had that way of looking at her like she was slightly amusing, like a puppy that had wandered into the wrong yard. You play piano? No, Elena lied quickly. I don't know anything about it. Good, because that's a $100,000 instrument. Probably cost more than your mom makes in 5 years, right? His friends laughed. Not cruel laughter, just casual amusement. That somehow made it worse. They weren't even trying to be mean. This was just how they saw the world, divided into people who mattered and people who didn't. Elena mumbled another apology and hurried out, her face burning. She made it back to the small room off the kitchen and closed the door, leaning against it with her eyes shut tight. Her mother looked up from folding laundry. Everything okay, baby? Yeah, fine, but it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. Elena pulled out her phone. The screen cracked from when she'd dropped it last month. They couldn't afford to fix it, so she just dealt with the spiderweb of broken glass. She opened YouTube and searched for performances of the Fantasie Impromptu, plugging in her cheap earbuds. As the music filled her ears, she closed her eyes and let her fingers move in her lap, practicing silently, every note, every phrase, every subtle dynamic change. She knew this piece better than Vivian ever would. Despite the expensive lessons and the perfect piano and the fancy teacher, Elena knew it because she loved it, because she'd spent hundreds of hours teaching herself, because music was the one thing in her life that felt like it belonged to her. From down the hall, she could hear Vivian starting to practice again. The notes came out harsh and frustrated, still missing that essential quality that made the music breathe. Elena listened and thought about how unfair everything was, how she'd probably never get to play on a real piano like that one, how she'd probably never get the chance to show anyone what she could do. She had no idea that tomorrow night everything would change, that in less than 24 hours, she'd be sitting at that $100,000 piano in front of 200 people, that the same kids who looked through her like she was invisible would finally see her. Really see her for the first time. But for now, she just sat in that tiny room, practicing silently in her lap, while the girl with every advantage struggled with a piece Elena could play in her sleep. The morning of the gala arrived with chaos. Elena woke up on the small cot in the maid's room to the sound of her mother's phone ringing at 6:30. That was never a good sign. Yes, Mrs. Harrington, of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Maria was already pulling on her uniform, the same navy blue dress she wore every day. Her face looked tired. She always looked tired lately. What's wrong? Elena asked, rubbing her eyes. Emergency. Something about the flower arrangements being all wrong. You'll have to get yourself to school today, okay? Elena nodded. She was used to this. The Harringtons always had emergencies that somehow required her mother to drop everything. Last month it was because Mrs. Harrington couldn't decide which throw pillows matched the new curtains. The month before because the bottled water in the fridge wasn't cold enough. By the time Elena got to the penthouse after school, the place was buzzing with activity. Caterers rushed through the kitchen. A team was setting up chairs in the main living room. Someone was arranging flowers that probably cost more than a month of her mother's salary. And through it all, she could hear Vivian's piano practice echoing from the music room. Still struggling with the same passages, Elena found her mother in the pantry, counting wine glasses. 87, 88.
Oh, hi, baby.
Just stay out of the way today, okay? Everyone's stressed, that was putting it mildly. Mrs. Harrington swept past, her phone pressed to her ear, barking orders at someone about the placement of the string quartet. Mr. Harrington was in his study, probably hiding from all the commotion. And somewhere upstairs, Vivian was having what sounded like a complete breakdown. Elena settled into her usual spot with her homework, but she couldn't concentrate. The energy in the penthouse was electric with tension. Something felt like it was about to explode. It did, around 3 o'clock. The music room suddenly went silent. Then came a scream of frustration so loud that it echoed through the entire floor. Elena heard footsteps running, voices raised in panic. She peeked out to see Mrs. Harrington rushing toward the music room. What happened? Vivian, what's wrong? Mr. Peterson just called. Vivian's voice was hysterical. He has the flu. He can't come for my final practice session. He's not coming. Well, surely you can practice on your own. I can't. I need him. Mom, I can't do this without one more lesson. I'm going to mess up in front of everyone. Elena crept closer, staying in the shadows of the hallway. Through the partially open door, she could see Vivian pacing back and forth, her face red and blotchy from crying. Mrs. Harrington was trying to calm her down, but Vivian was spiraling. Everyone's going to be here. The Vanderbilts, the Chens, that critic from the Times. And I'm going to humiliate myself. I can't play this piece, Mom, I can't. Sweetheart, you've been practicing for months, and I'm still terrible at it. You heard Mr. Peterson yesterday. He said I'm forcing the transitions. He said my tempo is inconsistent. He said. She dissolved into tears. Mrs. Harrington looked helpless, patting her daughter's shoulder while simultaneously typing furiously on her phone, probably trying to find a replacement piano teacher at the last minute. Elena knew she should leave, go back to the small room and mind her own business, but her feet stayed planted. She listened as Mrs. Harrington made call after call, each one ending in disappointment. Every qualified piano teacher in Manhattan was either unavailable or couldn't come on such short notice. After about an hour, things seemed to calm down. Vivian retreated to her room and Mrs. Harrington went to deal with the caterers. Elena thought maybe that was the end of the drama. Then Vivian's friends arrived. There were 3 of them, all from her private school, all dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. They swept into the penthouse like they owned it, air-kissing Mrs. Harrington and gushing about how beautiful everything looked. "Where's Viv?" one of them asked. "In her room. She's had a difficult day." They found Vivian in the music room a few minutes later, staring at the piano like it was her enemy. Elena was dusting the bookshelves in the adjacent library, close enough to hear everything but invisible as always. "I can't believe this is happening," Vivian moaned. "This gala is going to be such a disaster." "You'll be fine," one friend said, though she didn't sound convinced. "You know the piece. Barely. And now everyone's going to see me fail. Do you know who's coming tonight? Half the board of the Metropolitan Opera. That pianist Catherine Wu, who's like famous. And I'm going to sit down at that piano and prove that I'm exactly as mediocre as Mr. Peterson probably thinks I am." Elena's hand paused on the bookshelf. She felt a strange mix of sympathy and frustration. Vivian had everything, the best teacher, unlimited practice time, a perfect instrument, and she was still struggling. While Elena, with her broken keyboard and YouTube videos, could play the piece perfectly in her sleep. One of Vivian's friends noticed Elena then. She nudged the others, and suddenly all 4 girls were looking at her. Elena's stomach tightened. She knew that look. "At least you don't have our problems," the friend said with a smirk. "I bet you don't have to worry about performing at fancy galas." The others giggled. It wasn't outright cruel, but it had that casual dismissiveness that hurt more than direct insults. They weren't even trying to be mean. They just genuinely saw Elena as someone so far beneath them that her feelings didn't matter. "I bet she's never even touched a piano," another one added, examining her manicured nails. "Probably doesn't know the difference between Mozart and Beethoven." Elena's face burned. She kept dusting, keeping her expression neutral even though her heart was pounding. "Just be invisible," she told herself. "Just stay quiet. Don't make trouble." Her mother needed this job. "Maybe she listens to that basic pop music," the first friend said. "You know, that stuff they play on the radio." Chase walked in then, carrying his lacrosse stick. He took in the scene. His sister looking miserable, her friends looking bored, and Elena dusting in the corner. "What's going on?" "Vivian's freaking out about tonight," one of the friends explained. "Mr. Peterson bailed." Chase grinned and Elena's stomach sank. She knew that grin. It meant he was about to say something he thought was funny. "Well, maybe we found your replacement, Viv." He gestured toward Elena with his lacrosse stick. "I'm sure the maid's daughter would love to fill in. Bet she's a natural prodigy or something." The room erupted in laughter, not just polite chuckles, but real laughter, like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. Vivian actually smiled for the first time since her meltdown. "Oh my God, can you imagine?" one friend said between giggles. "No offense," she added, glancing at Elena, though the offense was already crystal clear. "She probably thinks a grand piano is just a really big keyboard," another one added. More laughter. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she continued dusting the same shelf over and over. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to say something to defend herself, but what was the point? They'd never believe her anyway. And if she caused a scene, her mother would be the one to pay for it. I mean, has she ever even been to a concert? Chase continued, warming to his joke. Do they teach music at public schools anymore? Chase stopped, Vivian said, but she was still smiling. The mockery had lifted her mood, given her someone to feel superior to. Elena set down her dust cloth carefully, keeping her movements slow and controlled. She walked toward the door, head down, just wanting to escape. Where are you going? One of the friends called out in a fake sweet voice. We're just joking around. Don't be so sensitive, but Elena didn't stop. She walked down the hallway, past all those family photos, past the crystal vases and the expensive art, back to that tiny room off the kitchen. Her mother wasn't there. She was probably dealing with some other crisis in another part of the penthouse. Elena sat on the cot and pulled out her cracked phone with shaking hands. She put in her earbuds and searched for her favorite performance of the Fantasie Impromptu. As the music filled her ears, she closed her eyes and let the tears come. They didn't know. None of them knew. They thought she was nobody, nothing, just the helps kid who didn't matter. They had no idea that she could play circles around Vivian, that she understood that piece in ways their expensive teacher couldn't even begin to teach. That music was the one thing in her life that made sense, the one thing that was truly hers. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. This was just how things were. People like the Harringtons lived in one world, and people like Elena and her mother lived in another. Those worlds weren't supposed to touch. Through the walls, she could hear the preparations continuing. The gala would start in just a few hours. Vivian would somehow pull herself together and perform, probably adequately enough that her parents' friends would clap politely. And Elena would stay hidden in the small room, invisible as always. She had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, those two worlds were about to collide in a way no one could have predicted, that the same people who had just mocked her would soon be standing speechless, watching her do something they never imagined possible. But for now, she just sat there in that tiny room, listening to music through her broken phone, while tears dried on her cheeks and her fingers moved silently through the patterns of a piece she could play better than anyone in that penthouse. The penthouse transformed as evening approached. Elena watched from her corner as waiters in crisp white shirts arranged champagne glasses on silver trays. The string quartet set up near the windows where the Manhattan skyline glittered like a jewelry box. Everything sparkled, the crystal chandelier, the polished floors, even the people who started arriving in their designer gowns and tailored suits. Elena stayed hidden in the small room off the kitchen, but she could hear everything. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the polite conversations about stock markets and vacation homes. Her mother rushed past every few minutes, refilling trays, clearing used glasses, making sure everything ran smoothly. She looked exhausted, but she smiled at Elena each time she passed. You okay, baby? I'm fine, Mom, but she wasn't fine. The afternoon's mockery still stung. Elena tried to focus on her book, but the words blurred together. She could hear the string quartet playing now, classical pieces she recognized from her online research. Her foot tapped along unconsciously to the rhythm. Around 7:30, the music stopped. Someone was making an announcement. Helena crept to the doorway to listen. Ladies and gentlemen, we're so delighted you could join us this evening. Mr. Harrington's voice boomed across the room. As you know, this gala supports the Youth Arts Initiative, bringing music education to underprivileged children across the city. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Here they were, raising money to give poor kids access to music, while the actual poor kid in the apartment had just been mocked for probably not knowing what a piano was. And now, Mr. Harrington continued, my talented daughter Vivian will perform Chopin's Fantasie Impromptu for you. Vivian? Polite applause filled the room. Elena heard footsteps, then a long pause. Then more footsteps, faster this time, and urgent whispers. She locked herself in her room. She heard Mrs. Harrington hiss to her husband. She says she can't do it. She's having a panic attack. Well, get her out here. We have 200 people waiting. I'm trying. She won't open the door. The whispers grew more frantic. Elena heard Mrs. Harrington's heels clicking rapidly up the stairs, then the sound of her knocking on a door, her voice alternating between soothing and frustrated. The guests in the living room began murmuring among themselves. The energy in the room shifted from anticipation to awkward confusion. Elena's mother appeared in the doorway, her face worried. Mrs. Harrington is really upset, she whispered. Vivian won't come out. The whole evening is falling apart. Elena stood up. Her heart was pounding and she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the afternoon's humiliation still burning in her chest. Maybe it was years of being invisible finally reaching a breaking point. Maybe it was just that she knew, really knew that piece of music and it seemed wrong for it to go unplayed. "Mom," she said quietly, "I can play it." Maria stared at her daughter. "What?" "The song Vivian was supposed to play. I know it, I've been practicing it for months." "Elena, no. This isn't, you can't just—" But Elena was already walking toward the hallway. Her mother followed, grabbing her arm. "Baby, please. We need this job. You can't just walk out there and—" "I'm not trying to cause trouble, Mom, I promise. But they need someone to play, right? And I can do it. I really can." She could see the conflict on her mother's face. Pride and fear and disbelief all mixed together. Before Maria could respond, Mrs. Harrington came rushing down the stairs, her face flushed and her eyes slightly wild. "This is a disaster," she muttered to herself. "An absolute disaster. All those people out there and we have no performance. The Chens are here. The Vanderbilts. That critic from—" She stopped mid-sentence, nearly running into Elena in the hallway. "What are you doing here? Maria, please, I need you to help with the guests. Get them more champagne or something. Distract them." Elena took a breath. Her whole body trembled, but she forced the words out. "Mrs. Harrington, excuse me." The woman barely glanced at her. "Not now. I can play it." "What?" "The piece. Vivian's piece. I know how to play it. If you need someone to perform, I can do it." Mrs. Harrington stared at her like she'd started speaking a foreign language. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "That's absurd. You can't just— This is a joke, right? Did Chase put you up to this?" "No, ma'am. I really know the piece. I've been practicing it for months. I can play it for the guests if you want." "On what piano have you been practicing exactly?" Mrs. Harrington's voice dripped with skepticism. "Where would you even learn—" "I taught myself. From videos online. And I have a keyboard at home." Mrs. Harrington opened her mouth, probably to say no, but Mr. Harrington appeared at the top of the stairs. He'd clearly heard the conversation. "Let her try," he said flatly. "What?" "Absolutely not. We can't just— We have 200 guests waiting for a performance. Our daughter is locked in her room having a breakdown. What exactly do you suggest we do? Announce that there's no show? Do you know how embarrassing that would be? But we can't let the maid's daughter— Why not? Worst case, she's terrible and we apologize and move on. Best case, we have a performance and save some face. Either way, it's better than nothing." Mrs. Harrington looked like she wanted to argue more, but the sound of restless conversation from the living room made the decision for her. She turned to Elena, her expression a mixture of desperation and disbelief. Fine. But if you mess this up, if you embarrass us—" "She won't," Maria said firmly, stepping forward. Elena had never heard that tone in her mother's voice before, strong, almost defiant. "My daughter is very talented." Mrs. Harrington hurried toward the living room to make some announcement. Mr. Harrington gestured for Elena to follow. As she walked down the hallway, she heard a door slam upstairs and angry footsteps. "Are you kidding me?" Vivian's voice echoed down the stairs. "You're going to let her play? On my piano? In front of my guests? Your guests are waiting for a performance, Vivian. You locked yourself in your room. Because I was nervous. I was going to come out. And now you're replacing me with the maid's kid?" But they were already in the living room. Elena could feel Vivian's glare burning into her back. She could also feel every other eye in the room turning to look at her. 200 wealthy strangers, all dressed in clothes that cost more than her mom made in a month. All staring at this 12-year-old girl in worn jeans and a faded sweater. Mr. Harrington was already speaking to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We have a special treat for you this evening. A performance by a young, undiscovered talent. Please welcome Elena Santos." The polite applause was thin and confused. Elena could see the guests looking at each other, raising eyebrows, whispering behind their hands. She recognized some of the faces from the afternoon. Chase's friends, Vivian's friends, all of them looking shocked and some amused. Like this was going to be entertaining in the worst way possible. She found her mother's face in the crowd. Maria stood near the back, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. Tears were already streaming down her cheeks. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, Elena understood something profound. This wasn't about proving anything to the Harringtons or their fancy guests. This wasn't even about the music itself. This was for her mom. For every early morning and late night. For every time someone had treated them like they were invisible. For all the sacrifices Maria had made so Elena could have a better life. Elena walked to the piano, and the room seemed to stretch out forever. Each step felt both too fast and too slow. The piano bench was exactly as she'd imagined, smooth leather, the perfect height. She sat down and adjusted her position, just like she'd seen the professionals do in videos. The keys gleamed under the chandelier light. They were perfect, ivory white and ebony black, each one precisely tuned, so different from her broken keyboard at home. She placed her fingers on the keys and felt their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. The room went completely silent. Even the whispers stopped. Everyone was watching, waiting, probably expecting her to fail spectacularly. Elena looked out one more time at her mother. Maria's lips moved silently, and Elena knew what she was saying without hearing it. "I love you, baby. I'm proud of you." That was all she needed. Elena took a deep breath, closed her eyes for just a moment, and began to play. The opening notes cascaded from the piano like water flowing over rocks. Clean, clear, perfect. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, moving across the keys with a confidence that came from hundreds of hours of silent practice. The muscle memory was there, but more than that, the feeling was there. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. The room seemed to disappear around her. There were no judgmental guests, no mocking teenagers, no desperate Harringtons trying to save face. There was only the music and everything it meant. Every lonely afternoon. Every moment of feeling less than. Every time she'd been invisible. All of it poured through her fingers and into Chopin's masterpiece. And for the first time in her life, Elena Santos was impossible to ignore. The first notes seemed to hang in the air like something fragile and beautiful. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that surprised even her. The opening cascade was technically demanding, requiring speed and precision, but she played it as naturally as breathing. Every note landed exactly where it should, crisp and clear. In the audience, someone's phone stopped mid-reach back to their pocket. A woman who'd been whispering to her husband fell silent mid-sentence. The energy in the room shifted from polite skepticism to something else entirely. Attention. Real attention. Elena's left hand began the steady accompaniment pattern while her right hand picked up the melody. This was the part where Vivian always struggled, where the two hands had to work independently, telling different parts of the same story. But Elena's hands knew this music like they knew how to tie her shoes or brush her teeth. The rhythm was as natural as her heartbeat. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore. She wasn't thinking about the people watching or the stakes or what would happen after. She was inside the music now, feeling every phrase, every rise and fall of emotion. The piece built gradually, the melody growing more insistent, more passionate. Near the back of the room, Maria had both hands pressed over her mouth. Tears ran freely down her face, but she was smiling behind her hands. She'd known her daughter was practicing, sure. She'd heard her humming melodies and seen her fingers tapping on tables. But this was beyond anything she'd imagined. Her baby wasn't just playing the piano. She was making magic. Vivian stood frozen in the doorway leading to the stairs. She'd come down planning to storm through and make a scene, to remind everyone that this was supposed to be her moment. But the music stopped her cold. Her mouth hung slightly open as she watched Elena's fingers fly across the keys. This was the same piece she'd been butchering for months, but it sounded completely different. It sounded the way it was supposed to sound. Chase stood next to his sister, equally stunned. His lacrosse stick hung forgotten in his hand. Just hours ago, he'd been joking about the maid's daughter playing piano like it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. The joke felt hollow now, even cruel. He glanced at his friends scattered through the crowd, their expressions mirrors of his own shock. The piece moved into the middle section, where the tempo shifted and the mood darkened slightly. This was the part that required true musical understanding, not just technical skill. You had to know when to push forward and when to hold back, when to let a phrase breathe and when to drive through it. Elena navigated these changes instinctively, her whole body swaying slightly with the music. An older man in the third row leaned forward in his seat. His name was Vincent Chen, and he'd been teaching and conducting music for 40 years. He'd come to this gala as a favor to the Harringtons, expecting a mediocre performance from an overprivileged teenager, followed by polite applause and decent wine. Instead, he was witnessing something he rarely saw even in professional concerts. A musician completely lost in the music, playing not for applause or recognition, but for pure love of the art. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Not the whole performance, just a few seconds, but enough to remember this moment. Around him, others were doing the same. Not in a disrespectful, social media-obsessed way, but reverently, like they knew they were seeing something special. The technical difficulty of the piece ramped up. Elena's right hand began the rapid, intricate passages that gave the Fantaisie Impromptu its reputation for being hard to master. Her fingers moved so fast they almost blurred, dancing across the keys in patterns that seemed impossible. Yet every note rang out clearly, each one part of a larger musical sentence that made perfect sense. Mrs. Harrington stood near the entrance to the dining room, one hand gripping the doorframe. Her mind was reeling. This was the maid's daughter, the girl she barely noticed, who she sometimes forgot was even in the apartment, the one her children had mocked just hours ago. And she was playing like a professional, better than a professional. She was playing like someone who understood something fundamental about music that couldn't be taught. The melody soared now, reaching toward its emotional peak. Elena leaned into it, her eyes closed, her expression serene. She looked nothing like the timid girl who usually kept her head down and tried to stay invisible. At this piano, she was transformed. She was powerful. She was undeniable. In the crowd, a woman in an elegant black dress wiped tears from her cheeks. She didn't even know why she was crying. There was just something about the way this young girl played. Something raw and honest and heartbreaking. The music seemed to speak of struggle and hope and dreams that refused to die even when the world tried to crush them. The piece built to its dramatic climax, all the musical themes coming together in a whirlwind of sound. Elena's whole body moved with the effort now, her fingers pressing deep into the keys to draw out the full resonance of the instrument. This was the moment where everything had to align perfectly. Technique, emotion, timing, dynamics. One wrong note, one missed cue, and the whole thing could collapse, but Elena didn't miss. Every note landed exactly right. The sound filled the penthouse, echoing off the high ceilings and the marble floors, surrounding everyone in waves of pure musical beauty. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was feeling made audible. It was every dream that ever refused to die. Then, just as suddenly as it had built up, the music softened. The final section began, a quiet, contemplative echo of the opening theme. Elena's touch became gentle again, almost delicate. Her fingers barely seemed to touch the keys now, drawing out whisper-soft notes that hung in the air like secrets. The room was completely silent except for the piano. No one coughed. No one shifted in their seats. No one even seemed to breathe. They were all held captive by this slight girl at the piano, this nobody who had suddenly become impossible to ignore. Elena played the final phrases with such tenderness it felt almost painful. Each note seemed reluctant to let go of the one before it. The music was saying goodbye, winding down, preparing to release everyone from its spell. But no one wanted to be released. They wanted to stay in this moment forever. The last few notes fell like gentle rain, soft, softer, softest. Elena's hands hovered over the keys for the final chord, letting it breathe, letting it resonate through the room. Then, with a touch so light it was barely there, she played the ending. The sound faded slowly, naturally, dying away into a silence that felt sacred. For a moment, just one perfect, suspended moment, nobody moved. The last notes hung in the air like smoke, and it was as if the entire room had forgotten how to react. Elena sat perfectly still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. Then the spell broke. The applause started with one person. The older man in the third row, Vincent Chen, rose to his feet, clapping hard and fast. Then another person stood. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, applauding so loudly it was almost overwhelming. Some people were cheering. Many were crying. Elena opened her eyes and reality came crashing back. She looked out at the sea of standing, applauding people, and her mind couldn't quite process what was happening. These were the same people who'd been whispering about her minutes ago, skeptical and probably expecting her to fail. Now they were giving her a standing ovation. Her eyes found her mother immediately. Maria was sobbing openly, not even trying to hide it anymore. She had both hands pressed to her heart, and she was mouthing words Elena could read even from across the room. "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you, baby." That's when Elena started crying too. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when your heart is too full to contain everything you're feeling. She stood up from the bench on shaky legs, overwhelmed by the response. Vincent Chen was already making his way through the crowd toward her. Other people were trying to do the same, all of them talking at once, their voices a blur of excitement and praise. Mrs. Harrington stood frozen, her mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. Mr. Harrington was already calculating the social capital they'd just gained by discovering this young talent, but Elena didn't care about any of that. She stepped away from the piano and started walking, then running, toward the back of the room, toward her mother. The crowd parted for her, still applauding, and when she reached Maria, they collapsed into each other's arms. "You were amazing," Maria whispered, holding her daughter so tightly. "You were so amazing, baby, so beautiful." Elena buried her face in her mother's shoulder and let herself cry. All the years of feeling invisible, all the mockery and dismissal, all the hours of practicing on a broken keyboard in their tiny apartment. It all meant something now. She'd proven something not just to the Harringtons or their fancy guests, but to herself. She was somebody. She'd always been somebody. The world just hadn't been paying attention. Elena and her mother stood there for what felt like forever, just holding each other while the applause continued around them. When they finally pulled apart, Elena realized that people were waiting to talk to her. Not just politely acknowledging her, but actually wanting to speak with her. It felt surreal. The first person to reach them was the older man who'd stood up first. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "That was extraordinary," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Vincent Chen. I teach at the Youth Orchestra of New York and conduct several programs around the city." Elena shook his hand, still feeling like she was in a dream. "Thank you, sir. How long have you been studying piano?" Elena glanced at her mother nervously. I haven't really studied. I mean, not with a teacher. I teach myself from videos online." Vincent's eyebrows shot up. "You're self-taught?" "That performance was self-taught." "Yes, sir. We can't really afford lessons, so I just watch performances and tutorials on YouTube. And I practice on a keyboard we got from a thrift store. Most of the keys don't work right, but it's enough to learn the patterns." Vincent looked at Maria, then back at Elena. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, but in amazement. "Young lady, I've been teaching music for 40 years. I've worked with students from Juilliard, from conservatories around the world. What you just did, that level of musicianship, that emotional depth, some of my advanced students never achieve that. And you did it by teaching yourself on a broken keyboard?" Elena didn't know what to say. She just nodded. "I'd like to offer you something," Vincent continued. "A full scholarship to our academy. Private lessons, ensemble training, performance opportunities, everything. And I'd like to work with you personally. I think you have something truly special." Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A scholarship?" "A full scholarship? Absolutely. We have a fund specifically for talented students who need financial support. Elena more than qualifies." He pulled out a business card. "Please call me this week. We'll set everything up." Before Elena could fully process what was happening, other people were approaching. A woman in a designer gown who turned out to be a music journalist, a couple who ran a foundation for arts education, a concert pianist who'd performed at Carnegie Hall. They all wanted to talk to her, to tell her how moved they were, to ask about her story. Through the crowd, Elena caught sight of Vivian. The older girl stood near the piano, her face a complicated mix of emotions. She wasn't glaring anymore. She just looked stunned, maybe a little sad. After a moment, she started walking over. Elena tensed, expecting anger or another cruel comment. But when Vivian reached her, she just stood there awkwardly for a moment. "You were really good," Vivian said quietly. It clearly cost her something to say it. "I've been taking lessons for 6 years and I can't play like that. I didn't even know you could play at all." "I've never really told anyone," Elena said. "Why not?" Elena shrugged. "I guess I didn't think anyone would care, or believe me." Vivian looked down at her expensive shoes. "I'm sorry for what I said earlier. What we all said. It was mean. You didn't deserve that. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase the years of being invisible or the afternoon's mockery. But it was something." Elena could see that it was genuine, even if it came from a place of shame and embarrassment. "It's okay," Elena said, and surprisingly she meant it. She didn't have space for anger right now. She was too full of other feelings: joy, disbelief, hope. Chase appeared next to his sister, looking equally uncomfortable. "Yeah, I'm sorry too. That was really ignorant of me. You're incredibly talented." Mrs. Harrington approached then, her expression complicated. She'd spent years barely noticing Elena, treating her and Maria as part of the furniture. Now this girl she'd overlooked had just stunned her entire social circle. "Elena, she started, then stopped. Her eyes were watery. "I owe you and your mother an apology. A big one. I haven't treated you both with the respect you deserve. You've been in our home for years and I never really saw you."
"That's shameful."
"I'm sorry." Maria squeezed Elena's hand. Mrs. Harrington turned to her. "Maria, you've worked for us with nothing but dedication and grace, and I've taken that for granted. I'd like to make some changes. Better pay, better hours, and Elena should feel welcome here. Not just tolerated, but actually welcome. If she wants to practice on our piano, she should. Anytime." "Thank you," Maria said softly. "That means a lot." The crowd around Elena continued to grow. People were taking photos, not in an invasive way, but asking permission first, wanting to remember this moment. Several guests asked Elena questions about her practice routine, her favorite composers, her dreams for the future. "I'd love to perform more," Elena admitted to one group, "and maybe someday teach music to other kids who can't afford lessons. I know what it's like to want something so badly and feel like it's out of reach." A woman in the back pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this, if that's okay. I write for the Times Art section. I think people need to hear your story." Within an hour, a video of Elena's performance was circulating on social media. Someone had recorded it and posted it with a caption about an unknown prodigy. By the next morning, it would have millions of views. By the end of the week, Elena would be invited to perform on a morning talk show, but she didn't know any of that yet. Right now, she was just standing in the Harringtons' living room, surrounded by people who finally saw her, holding Vincent Chen's business card like it was made of gold. Mr. Harrington appeared with glasses of sparkling cider for Elena and her mother. "A toast," he announced to the room, "to Elena, and to the reminder that talent and beauty can be found in the most unexpected places. May we all keep our eyes open enough to see it." Everyone raised their glasses. Elena looked at her mother, who was crying again, happy tears that seemed endless tonight. They clinked their glasses together, and Elena took a sip of the sweet, fizzy drink. It felt celebratory and surreal all at once. As the evening wound down and guests started to leave, many stopped to speak with Elena one more time. Vincent reminded her to call him. The journalist asked if she could do an interview. A philanthropist handed Maria a card, saying her foundation helped families with educational expenses. When the last guest had gone and the caterers were cleaning up, Elena and her mother finally sat down together on the couch in the servants' quarters. The fancy gala felt like it had happened in another world, but Vincent's card was real in Elena's hand. The promise it represented was real. "I can't believe this is happening," Elena whispered. "I can," Maria said, pulling her daughter close. "I always knew you were special, baby. I just didn't know how to give you the opportunities you deserved. Maybe now." She gestured to the card. "Maybe now doors are opening. We did this together, Mom. All those days you brought me here so I could listen to the piano. All the times you covered extra shifts so we could keep that broken keyboard. All of it mattered." They sat there in comfortable silence, both processing the evening. Through the open door, they could hear the piano in the music room, not being played, just sitting there waiting. But it felt different now. It wasn't forbidden anymore. It wasn't something Elena had to admire from a distance. Mrs. Harrington had said she could practice anytime she wanted. The following weeks unfolded like a fairy tale. Elena started classes at Vincent's Academy, where she met other serious young musicians who accepted her immediately. The story of her performance spread beyond New York, picked up by news outlets across the country. Self-taught prodigy stuns elite gala read one headline. The maid's daughter who made them speechless read another. But through all of it, Elena stayed grounded. She practiced every day, not for fame or recognition, but because she loved music, because it was hers in a way that nothing else had ever been. Vincent became her mentor and friend, nurturing her talent while making sure she developed proper technique to match her natural musicality. 3 years later, when she was 15, Elena performed at Carnegie Hall as part of a youth concert series. Her mother sat in the front row. wearing a new dress she'd bought for the occasion. The Harringtons were there too, several rows back, still awkward but genuinely proud. Vivian had quit piano. It had never been her passion anyway. But she'd become one of Elena's supporters, posting about her performances online and bringing friends to her concerts. As Elena walked onto the Carnegie stage that night, she thought about the scared 12-year-old who'd sat at the Harringtons' piano 3 years ago. That girl had been invisible, dismissed, mocked for dreaming above her station. But she'd had something they couldn't see, a gift that refused to stay hidden, a love for music that couldn't be contained. Elena placed her fingers on the keys and looked out at the audience. She found her mother's face, still her anchor, still her reason for everything. Maria smiled, tears already falling, and mouthed those familiar words, "I'm so proud of you." Elena smiled back, took a breath, and began to play. The music filled the historic hall, and once again she made them all speechless. But this time it wasn't a surprise. This time they'd come specifically to hear her, to witness her gift, to be moved by her story, and she was no longer invisible. She never would be again.